Martin had once been the kind of man people aspired to be. With a successful business, a beautiful home, and a loving family, he seemed to have life figured out. His days were filled with meetings, deals, and the occasional weekend getaway with his wife, Sarah, and their 2 daughters, Emily and Sophie. They were the picture-perfect family, always smiling in the photos on his desk, always together at the dinner table. But life, in all its unpredictability, had other plans. It happened on a night that was supposed to be just another ordinary evening. Martin was working late, as he often did, while Sarah took the girls to visit her parents. The rain had been falling steadily for hours, creating slick roads and poor visibility. He got the call around midnight, the kind of call no one ever expects. There had been an accident, a terrible one. A drunk driver had lost control, swerved into the wrong lane, and collided head-on with their car. By the time Martin reached the hospital, it was too late. Sarah, Emily, and Sophie were gone. In the days that followed, Martin moved through life in a fog. The funeral was a blur of faces, condolences, and an overwhelming sense of loss. His house, once filled with laughter and warmth, became a silent mausoleum, each room a painful reminder of the family he'd lost. Work no longer held any meaning for him. He handed off responsibilities to his partners, stopped answering calls, and began to isolate himself from the world. Weeks turned into months, and as winter set in, the approach of Christmas was like a cruel joke. The decorations, the festive music, the cheer, it all seemed like a mockery of his grief. He avoided the holiday as best he could, even considering leaving the city altogether. But there was a part of him, a small, quiet part, that knew he couldn't keep running forever. One evening, as Martin sat alone in his darkened living room, staring at the Christmas tree he'd half-heartedly put up, he found himself picking up the phone. It was Father Michael on the other end, his voice steady and reassuring. "Martin, you've been through more than anyone should have to bear, but there's something that might help you, something that might help others too." Father Michael told him about the orphanage, a small, struggling place on the other side of town. The children there had no families, no one to celebrate Christmas with. Every year, the staff tried their best to make the holidays special, but they were always in need of extra help. This year, things were especially tough. Donations were down, and their usual Santa Claus, an older volunteer, had fallen ill. The priest's voice softened as he made his request. "Martin, would you consider stepping in? I know it's asking a lot, but I think it could be good for you." At first, Martin was hesitant. The thought of donning a Santa suit and playing the part of jolly old Saint Nick felt absurd, almost insulting in the face of his grief. How could he pretend to be happy, to spread joy, when he was still drowning in sorrow? But Father Michael's words lingered in his mind. Maybe, just maybe, it was worth a try. After all, what did he have left to lose? On Christmas Eve, Martin found himself standing outside the orphanage, a bag of gifts in hand. The building was modest, with a worn sign and simple decorations, but the warmth inside was palpable. As he walked in, the children's eyes lit up at the sight of Santa Claus. They ran towards him, their faces full of excitement, their voices a chorus of anticipation. For a moment, Martin felt a pang of doubt, unsure if he could go through with it. But then he saw their smiles, the pure, unfiltered joy that only children seem to have, and something inside him softened. He started handing out the gifts, one by one, each carefully chosen to suit the child's age and interests. The staff had provided him with a list, and Martin had spent hours picking out the perfect presents. As he moved through the room, he noticed a little girl standing by herself, watching him with a mixture of curiosity and caution. She was small, maybe 5 or 6 years old, with big brown eyes that seemed far too serious for her age. She reminded him so much of Emily that it almost took his breath away. Without thinking, Martin reached into his bag and pulled out a stuffed bear, one of the softest and fluffiest he could find. He knelt down and held it out to the girl. Her eyes widened as she took the bear, hugging it tightly to her chest. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. For the first time in what felt like forever, Martin felt a warmth spread through him. It wasn't much, just a small flicker, but it was enough to bring tears to his eyes. As the night went on, Martin continued to hand out gifts, but something had changed. He found himself laughing, really laughing, for the first time in months. The children's joy was infectious, their innocence a balm to his wounded heart. He played games with them, sang carols, and for a few hours, the weight of his grief lifted just enough to let in a sliver of light. When it was time to leave, Martin felt a strange mix of emotions. He was still grieving, still carrying the heavy burden of loss, but there was also something new, a sense of purpose, a glimmer of hope. The orphanage director, a kind woman named Mrs. Thompson, walked him to the door. "Thank you, Martin," she said softly. "You've given these children a Christmas they'll never forget. And I think you've given yourself something too." As Martin drove home that night, he thought about what Father Michael had said. Maybe helping others was the key to healing, to finding a way through the darkness. He didn't have all the answers, and he knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but for the first time in months, he felt like he could see a way forward. When he got back to his empty house, the silence didn't seem quite as oppressive. He took off the Santa suit and hung it up carefully, almost reverently. Then he sat down by the Christmas tree, the one he had been avoiding, and for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to remember the good times, the laughter, the love, the moments that made life worth living. He knew the pain would never fully go away, but he also knew that he could still make a difference, still bring joy to others. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start finding his way back to the man he used to be.